I joined Aakash in 9th standard. So I joined early, I gave ANTHE in 8th standard. Pretty much a game-changing moment for me. Now I'm competing all across India.
Hello, my achievers! How are all of you? I'm sure you're doing fantastic and keeping well, right? Hey, I'm sure that you are liking our BYJU'S social science videos. They've been put out for you, so please definitely watch them, like them. I know you are, because it's always fun to study together, right? Okay, so talking about studying, let's get started with today's geography session. So today we are going to be studying our second chapter in geography, which is ta-da! Forests and wildlife resources. So take a look at these two pictures. Do you see these pictures here? Now the first one, as we can see, is of a forest and consists of trees and natural vegetation. The second picture indicates wildlife. Now, wildlife, of course, we know includes all wild creatures such as tigers, cheetahs, some birds, except, of course, for domesticated animals or our pet animals. Now, wildlife also comprises plant species that grow in the wild. But I know what you must be thinking. You're probably wondering, why am I telling you all of it? Isn't it? Well, let me tell you. Forests are very important. Forests are home to more than 80% of land animals and plants and cover 31% of the world's total land area. Isn't that amazing? So, both forests and wildlife are very essential as part of our ecological system, as they provide us with clean air to breathe as well as food to eat. Now, before we begin with today's session, let us take a look at the topics that we will be covering in this particular chapter. Broadly, we are going to be covering it. So, this particular chapter consists of, number one, we will be doing the introduction. Then we will be talking about flora and fauna in India. We will be talking about different species. We will be talking about distribution of forests. We will also be talking about, very importantly, deforestation. We will then go ahead and understand what are the causes of biodiversity loss, and then we will talk about conservation. Now, breathe. We will be going more into detail into each of these subtopics, and by the end of this chapter, you're going to find easy peasy. Okay? So first, let us take a look at the significance of forests and wildlife resources and the interdependence of every living organism to survive. In fact, if you think about it, this entire chapter of ours covers very different aspects of this main topic. So it's very important that you understand this, right? Now, as you know, we share our planet Earth with millions of other living beings, including microorganisms, bacteria, insects, etc., right? So, with these different organisms, we form a complex web of an ecological system. And in fact, we are all dependent on and interdependent in this system for our survival. Okay, for example, we have plants, animals, and microorganisms which improve the quality of the air we breathe, the water that we drink, as well as the soil that produces our food, right? Forests play a vital role in the ecological system as they are also the primary producers of food on which we know that definitely all other living beings depend, right? But you must be wondering, how are living beings dependent on each other? In other words, how is there interdependence? Now, this is very important, okay? So, let's find out how there is interdependence, okay? So, first, let us just go ahead and understand the term biodiversity. Let me write this down for you over here. Biodiversity is a very important term. What does it mean? Biodiversity is the variety of life forms which are found on Earth. Now, these various life forms, they are interdependent on each other. So, let me explain this interdependency with an example for you. Now, let's take plants. Okay, we know that plants and trees, they take solar energy from the sun and the nutrients from the soil to make their food, right? Plants. Then what does the plant do? The plant stores the same nutrients in its leaves and fruits. Then these leaves and fruits are consumed by, say, an insect or a grasshopper, right? And this stored energy from the leaves and the fruit is then transferred to the grasshopper. Now let's assume that we have this bird who is very hungry, and this bird comes and feeds on this grasshopper. What will happen? Some of the same energy or nutrients are transferred again to that bird, right? And then similarly, when the leopard eats the bird, what happens? This nutrient cycle continues to flow. So as we understand, nutrients flow from one life form to another, and this kind of feeding relationship is what we call a food chain. Now this is a very important term. We've understood what a food chain is. Now, just like this food chain that I spoke about, this is a very small food chain. We have various other food chains that exist, and they are all interlinked, and they form a food web, as we can see over here. You see how all these different living beings and organisms are all interconnected. So, tell me, what would happen if we have, say, one particular member of the food chain that disappears? What would happen? Well, in such a situation, the survival of other living beings would become very difficult as each one is sort of dependent on the other, right? And then what would happen? Over time, all the members of the food chain would suffer and the chain might collapse, which would definitely not be good for anyone. Right? So this is about biodiversity. This is about the interdependence of living organisms on each other, and this is a very important thing to understand. Right? Now further, let's go ahead and understand our next topic, which is flora and fauna in India. So, the flora and fauna in India is the wide variety of species of plants and animals found across various regions. And here we're talking about India, so we're talking about flora and fauna in India. So the flora and fauna is well integrated into our lives through the ecosystem that we have just studied about a little earlier, right? But what is the problem? The problem is that the numbers of various species are constantly declining, and just having learned about independence, we know that this is really bad news, as eventually this would go ahead and affect the whole ecosystem, right? So definitely not a good thing, right? We're all interdependent. I told you, we keep coming back to this point of interdependence, and this is very, very important, right? Now, talking about interdependence, let's move on to our next topic, which is species. So here, what I'm going to be explaining or talking to you about are various categories of species. So first, let's talk about what a species is. Species are defined as a group of organisms, right? They're a group of organisms, and these species are categorized into various types. But before we go ahead and dive into this, have you ever wondered who keeps a track of all these species? I mean, there are so many species. Who can keep a track of this? Well, we do have one such organization, and this is the IUCN, or the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, or the IUCN. Now, this is a global authority that tracks various species around the world and then suggests preventive measures to protect them. Like I said, we don't want to lose any species. So this is the authority that takes care of all of this. So now we're going to go ahead and learn about different categories of species on the basis of IUCN, or as categorized by IUCN. So first up, we have the normal species. Now, what is normal species? Normal species are those whose population level is considered normal for their survival. For example, you have cattle or pine trees or salt trees or rodents, right? They have a normal population. We have them, amply available, right? This is the normal species. On the other hand, you have species that are in danger of extinction. They're not yet extinct, but they are in danger of extinction, and these are known as endangered species. So, the survival of such species is difficult if the declining population continues to operate. For example, you have the Bengal tiger, or you have the Asiatic lion, or you have the elephant, right? We know that the numbers of these particular species are rapidly declining. So these are endangered. And then finally, we have species whose population have declined and they are likely to go endangered in the very near future. And these are called vulnerable species. Now, a good example of this would be the Indian rhino. Right, so what have we discussed so far? Normal species, endangered species, vulnerable species. Then let's move on to the rare species, which is a species with a small population that may move into the endangered or the vulnerable category if the negative factors leading to its decline continue to operate, right? So they could become endangered or vulnerable very, very soon. For example, you have the desert fox, or you have the wild Asiatic buffalo, right? Okay, moving on to the next category, we're going to be talking about endemic species. Now, endemic species are only found in some particular areas which are usually isolated by natural or geographical barriers. So these are sort of like local species that you would find in a particular area only. For example, you have the Andaman teal, you have the Andaman wild pig, right? They belong to that areas. Now, a species may go extinct or basically even die or disappear from a local area, a region, a country, a continent, or even the entire earth. For example, the Asiatic cheetah and the pink head duck, who we do not find anymore. So these are extinct species. Now, talking about extinct species, let me share some fun facts with you about some extinct species. Tell me, have you ever heard about elephant birds? Sounds interesting, right? Elephant birds? Okay, let me tell you a little bit about these. Elephant birds were the largest birds to ever exist. A typical elephant bird, wait for this, weighed 650 kilograms on average and was 10 feet tall. So much larger than us human beings. Now, these elephant birds, they lived in Madagascar. Then apart from this, there was another very interesting species called the dreadnoughts, which is one of the species of the largest dinosaurs that ever lived. And this was about 85 feet long with a 37-foot long neck. And do you know how much it weighed? It's written on the screen. It weighed 58,967 kilograms approximately. Imagine how huge this was. Now, how did we know about them? We got to know about them from the rock deposits that were found in Patagonia as well as Argentina. Isn't this so interesting? And actually, if you think about it, it's also so sad that we will never have a chance to see these wonderful species. I mean, I would have loved to take a look at what these animals look like, especially the elephant bird. All right. With that, let's move on to our next topic, which is the distribution of forests. Now, did you know that the Indian government has classified forests into 3 categories in order to conserve India's vast forests and wildlife resources? So, first of all, we have the reserved forests. Then we have what is called protected forests, and then we have the unclassed forests. So, let's take a look at the reserved forests in India to understand what these are. Now, more than half of India's total forest land is reserved. What are reserved forests? Reserved forests basically come under the control of the government. Right? So here it is the government authorities that imply strict rules to protect the forest and wildlife. And this is so important, right? So here in these reserve forests, there's a restriction on hunting, cutting of trees, grazing of cattle. These activities are not allowed over here. Now, as you can see on the map over here, you can see that the states filled in green color are reserved forests. So you have so many states over here. You have Jammu and Kashmir, you have Andhra Pradesh, you have Uttarakhand, you have Kerala, you have Tamil Nadu, you have West Bengal and Maharashtra also, which have large percentages of their total forest area classified into reserve forests so that the government can go ahead and protect these areas, right? So reserve forest is by the government. Next, let's go ahead and talk about protected forests. These terms may be a little bit confusing, but actually they are not. You'll understand them, okay? So reserve forests meant to conserve forests, and we've talked about the states that they are present in. Now, protected forests. 1/3 of India's total forest area is declared as protected forest by the Forest Department or the central government. Now, the government has limited restrictions over here in these protected forests, and these forests are also managed by the government. So again, you know that reserve forest is managed by the government, protected forest also managed by the government. Now, what are the activities that are allowed here? So here in these areas, it's not as strict as the reserve forest. You can have certain activities like collection of woods by the locals as well as grazing of cattle. But what is definitely not allowed over here is the harming or the cutting of trees, as these forests are protected from further depletion. So this is also to take care of these forests, to conserve these forests. Now, in India, talking about protected forests, we have the areas of Bihar, we have Haryana, we have Punjab, we have Himachal Pradesh, Odisha, as well as Rajasthan, which have areas which come under basically protected forests. Now, reserved and protected forests have another name. They're also known as permanent forest estates. So if you take a look at the map, you can see that the highlighted part is the state of Madhya Pradesh, right? Now, this consists of the largest area under permanent forest, which constitutes 75% of its total forest area. Right, so this is good, which means the government is trying to take care of the forest, conserve the forest, right, by putting them under the category of either reserved or protected. Finally, there is the unclassed forests. Now, forests that are not covered in reserved and protected areas are considered unclassed. Right, very simple. So talking about ownership, these particular forests could be owned by the government, they could be owned by individuals, or they could even be owned by communities. And here in these areas, there are no restrictions on tree grazing or even on tree cutting. Now, again, if you take a look at the map over here, you can see that all the northeastern states and parts of Gujarat have a very high percentage of their forests which come under unclassed forests. And the examples of unclassed forests, for example, would be community forests. So what are community forests? Community forests are those which are managed by the local communities. All right? So, easy peasy. That was all about forests and types of forests. Now, let us move on to the next important topic, which is deforestation. Right? What is deforestation? Deforestation is the clearing of forest areas by cutting down trees. Now, we know that this is not very good, because talking about deforestation, this is one of the most major global issues that we're all facing today. Now, in India specifically, this deforestation that we're talking about, this actually started during the British rule, pre-independence. But why do you think that there was so much deforestation that was done during the pre-independence era? Any guesses? Well, the main causes were the British wanting the expansion of railways, agriculture, scientific forestry, and mining activities. All profit-based activities, right? Now, another cause in many parts of India was the promotion of a few favored species through what we call enrichment plantation. Now, what exactly is enrichment plantation? So, enrichment plantation is a type of farming in which you have one single commercially valuable species which is extensively planted, and all other species are eliminated. So, it's kind of like you're, taking away all the endemic species of that particular forest, and you're planting just one species over there which is meant only for profit. And we know that the British was interested in profit, right? So, as we understand, deforestation was done during the colonial period to favor the British profits. But then the question is, why did we still continue with deforestation even after independence? Well, since independence, the forests were then cleared for different reasons. They were cleared for and degraded by shifting cultivation, or jhoom, which is a type of slash and burn agriculture. Apart from that, you had river valley projects, you have the grazing of cattle, you have, the collection of basically mining, cutting trees for fuel wood. These were some of the leading causes of deforestation till date. Right? So the point is that it was a practice that started in the pre-independence era, but we still sort of continued it, and this is obviously not a very good thing. Right? Now, this kind of cutting down of forests leads us to our next topic, which is the causes of loss of biodiversity. Right? We have already learned that biodiversity is the existence of various kinds of animal and plant species which then together make a healthy environment or an ecosystem. So, habitat destruction or hunting and poaching, forest fires, poisoning, overpopulation, pollution, environmental pollution are some of the factors which have led to the decline in India's biodiversity. Other important causes of such environmental destruction are the uneven access and the consumption of resources. Because of all of this, we are losing our biodiversity, which we know is very is a very not good thing, because we're all, like I said, interdependent on this biodiversity. Right? Now, talking about loss of biodiversity, this leads us to our last topic of the session, which is conservation of forests and wildlife resources, right? So, due to the rapid decline in wildlife population and forestry, conservation has become the need of the hour. Conservation helps to preserve the ecological diversity and our life support systems, which we know are water, air, and soil. Now, in the 1960s and in the 1970s, you had a whole lot of conservationists who demanded a national wildlife protection program. Naturally, we needed to conserve our forests. And thus you had the Indian Wildlife Protection Act, which was then implemented in the year 1972. This is a very important act and a very important year. This particular act had various provisions for protecting forests and wildlife species, so we do not lose this valuable biodiversity, right? This program was aimed towards protecting the remaining population of certain endangered species by banning hunting, giving legal protection to their habitats, and restricting activities like poaching, hunting, illegal trade in wildlife. So we are basically trying to conserve whatever is still left, right? We want to conserve these endangered species, whether you're talking about plants or you're talking about animals. Now, central and state governments have also established certain areas as national parks and wildlife sanctuaries to protect forests and wildlife. Now, some examples of this would be the Kanha National Park, which is found in Madhya Pradesh. You have the Narayan Sarovar Sanctuary, which is found in Gujarat. The government of India also announced, apart from these reserved areas, for the sanctuaries and national parks, it also announced some animal projects for threatened species to regain the population of these animals. So some of the examples that we can talk about include Project Tiger, Project Elephant, the Crocodile Conservation Project, where we know that the numbers of these animals are like constantly declining. So these are specifically based at helping to protect these particular species, right? Now, talking about conservation measures, there have also been many instances where conservation was done by local communities, when the communities themselves came forward to protect the forests and conserve natural resources. So here it's quite wonderful. We have some exemplary movements or examples which actually explain the praiseworthy involvement of local communities. And you have one very famous movement, the famous Chipko movement in the Himalayas, which has not only successfully resisted deforestation in many areas, but it has also shown that community afforestation or planting of trees with indigenous species can be enormously successful with the whole community participating in this. right? So this is one such exemplary movement. Then you also have the Beach Bachao Andolan. Now, Beach Bachao Andolan is also another example of community conservation. This was initiated in the Tehri village of Uttarakhand. Right, and this was done to promote the use of native seed varieties for crop production without the use of chemicals. Isn't that wonderful? Because we know how harmful these chemicals are actually. Right, so without the use of chemicals. Then in India, we also had the Joint Forest Management Program, or the JFM, which is actually a very good example. This program projects like I said, a very good example of involving local communities in the management and the restoration of degraded forests. Okay, so here the government is sort of involving the local communities. Now, this program has been in existence since 1988, wherein the state of Odisha passed the first resolution for the Joint Forest Management Program. So you see, there are so many measures out there to conserve what we are losing, and I think that's a very, very important step. Now, we have covered quite a lot. We are already at the end of the chapter, so let me quickly summarize what we have learned in this session. So what did we start off with? We started off by talking about the introduction of wildlife and forests. We understood what wildlife is, what forests are. We also learned the definitions of both, and we talked about their ecological importance. We spoke about the interdependence of different organisms on each other, right? Then we went ahead and we spoke and studied about flora and fauna in India, and then we went ahead and we discussed the rich variety of species, and we went ahead and understood that every living being is quite well integrated through the ecosystem. Then in terms of the species category or the subtopic, we also learnt about different categories of species like the normal species, rare species, endangered species, vulnerable, endemic, extinct species, right? So you see how we've led from what biodiversity is, how organisms are interdependent on each other, and how these species are categorized. Then we went ahead and we spoke about deforestation. Now we spoke about we also discussed distribution of forests, which is the different categories of forests, right, and how they are distributed in India. Then we went ahead and spoke about deforestation. We spoke about deforestation during the colonial era. Basically, we're talking about why deforestation occurred during the pre-independence era, and what were the causes. The causes were the growth in urbanization and enrichment plantation, which was also a huge factor. Then we moved on and we spoke about the causes of diversity lost, and then we went and spoke about lastly the conservation of forests and wildlife, where we went ahead and we discussed the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, and we discussed community and conservation. There we learned about the involvement of the communities and various programs like the Chipko movement, the Beach Bachao Andolan, as well as the Joint Forest Management. Right, now you see we've done so much, but this chapter is a very easy chapter. It's actually quite a common sense chapter. So if you were to just understand the basic terms, you will find that it will be very easy to answer any questions that comes in your exam. Right? Alright, so that's it from today's chapter. Now, before I go, have you registered for ANTHE Aakash National Talent Hunt exam? Register now. Registration is absolutely free. Please go ahead and do this. Apart from that, join our BYJU'S mini learning program. This program, we have such a wonderful opportunity. This program is now free for the first 500 users every week. All you need to do is click on the link, type in the code YT first, and you will be able to avail of this program absolutely free, right? So do that. And in the meantime, definitely go ahead and watch all our sessions that we do for you on the BYJU'S 9 to 10 channel. And don't just watch these sessions. Definitely like, share and subscribe to our channel. This is very, very important. And that's it from me today. I'm going to see you really soon. Bye-bye.